Hi, everyone. We have a new author today, Adrian Lorains. Welcome to the launch of your book.
Thanks, Susan. It's great to be here.
So, your book is about change with confidence or changing with confidence, which I love. We all need that. And it's about growing change ready people with the know, learn, grow approach. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today in the interview. I think, especially in today's, with so much happening, I think it's really important to have team changing with confidence. So, your book, it presents as an approach to change management. And before we get to your solution, what are the common mistakes that most companies make in relation to managing change?
That's a great question. I think it's quite a big answer to this question. So I'm going to break this up into sort of about three parts. So the first part is really looking at our organizations and where we're at with change at the moment. So if you look at some of the recent statistics, as of 2022, we were expecting our employees to be making 10 large changes a year. And that's things like new IT systems, culture change, strategy changes. So quite a lot of big changes are happening. In 2016, that number was two. So that's increased fivefold in 6 years. And we're a few years on from that as well. So it's potentially even higher today. But that's quite a large amount of change we're expecting from our people across the organization. And in that same time, what's also happened is there's actually been quite a decrease in people's belief in their organization's ability to make change. So we've got 21% of people actually believe their organization is capable of making changes. So it's nearly 80% of people don't think that their organization can make changes, which I find to be a staggering statistic. So that leads me to my second part, which is it's really around what are these problems that we're seeing that have led to this decline in trust. So the three key ones that I see are really around knowledge. I don't think we're capturing knowledge very well in organizations. I worked in an organization once where I wanted to find out what their vision and values were. And I did a search on the internet, which is where I'd expect to find it. I found vision and values from 2 brands ago, so 10 years since they'd last had that vision and values. And I couldn't find anything about what they were doing currently. So those sorts of things are happening across organizations around the world. And it's quite a big problem if you're new to the organization and you want to find out what it is you need to do. And if you want to get people on the same page around whatever's happening with a process. And if you're trying to introduce change, you've now got 12 people who are doing the same job, but they've potentially got 12 different ways of doing that same process. So when you're making change, you're making 12 changes, not just one change. So with that lack of knowledge being written down, it's all living in people's heads. And that's causing quite a few problems, especially in the age of AI, where we now have, AI trying to find information for us. It obviously can't scan Peter's head while he's having lunch. It's basically lost to the organization that piece of knowledge. So you've got to go and ask Peter. We need to have better ways of doing that, I think. And this is also leading us into my second problem that I see, which is around learning. Learning has really just become an exercise in telling people. People stand up in front of people in organizations and they basically just tell them everything that they need to know about a change. But that doesn't necessarily help people to change. And this has happened because we don't have a lot of stuff documented. So it's living in people's heads. And that seems to be the best way to translate that, or, the most time effective way for some people. So that's leading to really not having great learning experiences because people are just a bit exhausted by them. And I generally see this happen one of two ways. One is a lot of people ask a lot of questions that can't be answered in those sessions. Everyone leaves exhausted and really doesn't really know what to do next. But at least you've got some questions and some work to do where you can actually start to plan out what you need to do and questions to answer. The other way is a lot of people sit there and they just nod their heads and they go back into the flow of their workday and they just kind of do what they were doing before. Maybe they might remember a little bit of what was there and maybe change a few things, but all in all, there's, very little change. So that sort of, knowledge and learning, we're not documenting well. That's leading us to having not great learning experiences. And the third part that I think is a problem is we're actually not documenting what we want as a measure of success or what good looks like for this change. So people don't really know what's expected to change from this learning experience they've taken part in either. So without having clear metrics around that, we often go, oh, everyone turned up to the training. Fantastic. success. But did the sales improve? Did the culture change? Are we more aligned with strategy? We didn't measure those things, and we didn't make it clear that's what we were measuring. So we've got a few different problems that are happening here, and they're the ones that I think are helping contribute to this lowering of trust in organizations' abilities to make change. And I think what's really happening with people is it's starting to wear people out as well. And that's also why you're seeing an increase in change fatigue. So the last statistic I saw was 54% of HR managers now list change fatigue as their top 5 barrier to making changes in their organizations. So there's a lot happening there. And when it comes to change fatigue, there's one thing that it's an example I like to give to sort of, I guess, highlight what it is to actually learn about something. And it's a little exercise of 3 tasks. So the first task is counting from 1 to 26. And you can do that in about sort of 6 to 8 seconds if you do it quickly. Recite the alphabet from A to Z, again, 6 to 8 seconds. But if you ask someone to say 1A, 2B, 3C, that's usually where I stop. That's about 6 seconds. And that's what you're trying to ask people to do when you want them to learn something new. Task A is their current routine. The second task is their new routine. And the third one is what they're doing while they're trying to learn that. Now, if you have, like we talked about earlier, not very well documented knowledge, they've just been told stuff, when they go back to their desk to try and learn that, they're now going, hang on, what was that about? Oh, hang on, no, that doesn't work. And then now they're remembering things. Now they're troubleshooting. They're adding more and more tasks into that task switching, which is just wearing them out even more. So that's the kind of thing that I think people are experiencing when they're going through poorly managed change. It's hard enough when change is managed well. When it's poorly managed, it's just wearing you out a lot more, which is contributing to that change fatigue.
Yeah, and then it's not sustainable, because people, like you said, are absolutely fatigued from it. And I know that you talk about the know, learn, grow, and that really is covering some of that where you said, when we know it, when we learn and we grow, it can solve some of these issues. Can you briefly tell, I mean, they need to buy the book to read really about these methods that are really helping in this change and what you talked about. But can you tell me just briefly around the know, learn, grow, how that comes as solving some of these issues?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't think Know, Learn, Grow is like a silver bullet that's going to solve all of your change adoption issues, but it definitely will help. So what I talk about with Know, Learn, Grow is trying to solve those 3 main problems that I was talking about. So with Know, we've got knowledge. We actually want to start documenting quite clearly what it is that we're trying to change. So having a clear written down knowledge that can be accessible AI, accessible by anyone, you can search for it and you can find it. So that will do a number of things. One, it just gives people that confidence, but it also allows them to support themselves to actually learn while they're in the flow of their normal workday. So once they've left any learning experience, they actually still have those support materials. So that's really around know. Learn is about shifting from it being a knowledge transfer discussion to being actually application of that knowledge. So you've got the written knowledge and the learning experience is about applying it. And I always say you need to take a bit of a risk-based approach to how you determine whether you design a learning experience for something. If the outcome of them making a mistake is something big, like you're investigated for fraud or you're losing customers or something that's going to be quite detrimental to your business, you probably want to have a learning experience designed where they can actually go and make mistakes and apply that knowledge in a practice environment where those outcomes aren't likely to happen. And then if you've got something that maybe, the application is going to be rejected and it'll take 2 minutes of rework for them. That's something you probably just go, I'll give them really well documented knowledge, and then they can just take that in the flow of their workday and practice it in their workday, because the majority of learning will happen in their workday anyway as they practice and refine. All you can really expect out of a learning experience is people to know what it is they don't know and know that they've got support materials to be able to do that. So that's really what you want as an outcome of a learning experience, so that they can feel confident to go and try that when they go back to the flow of their workday. And then the last thing you really need, and that's grow, and that's really about having very clearly documented metrics around how you're going to measure that impact.
Yeah, because if we don't know where we're going, if we don't know what we're trying to achieve, it really becomes, an exciting sort of game to play because we've got no goalpost to go to. Absolutely. And I know that you've got that specific sequence around that know, learn, grow. Starting with the know phase, before we attempt to acquire all these new skills and making these behaviors, why is it critical to sort of start with that know?
Well, one thing I like to think about is that our brains are lazy. They would prefer to stick with an existing routine than to shift to a new routine. And it's not necessarily they're lazy, it's just they're very good at conserving energy. And one of the examples I like to give of conserving energy is, I find this fascinating, that it's our eyes, they don't actually see what's going on. They just send stimuli to our brain, and then our brain interprets what it sees and actually builds that mental picture. And if you're walking down a street that you've walked down before, and you're paying attention to your shopping list or something else that's going on in your life, and you're not really paying attention to your surroundings, your brain's actually serving up to you pictures of what it saw last time you were walking down that street, not what you're seeing right now, because that conserves energy. So there's a number of things it does like that. And if you think of the example earlier about task switching, it doesn't want to be switching between tasks and doing all these extra things if it doesn't have to. So that's why you want to have a really clearly defined second task for someone to actually, when they learn, to review what they're doing. So if you don't have that clearly mapped out, then, that's knowledge. That's what you want to have there. That's the part that you really need to start with, because you can't learn something if you've got fragmented knowledge to build that off.
Yep,
And
I
then you
love
obviously
that.
can't grow if you don't learn.
Yep, absolutely love it. And if a company really fully embraces this know, learn, grow, what does their approach to change look like, both on a company-wide level and also on the individual person's level as well?
Yeah, so what I see is you've now got an organization full of people that are all approaching change in the same way. So at an organizational level, that looks like you've got a nice knowledge repository where people can go to and find what they're looking for about, processes or key changes that are happening in the organization. So people are feeling supported that they can find what they're looking for. You then have great learning experience. So anyone who's new to the organization, anyone who is changing roles in the organization or adding new tasks to what it is they do, they've actually got learning experiences and knowledge that supports them to be able to learn that appropriately. And there's also really clear metrics at an organizational level that sort of map out what it is we're doing, and when any change happens, what impact we're expecting on those metrics. So that's kind of an organizational level. And when you go down to the individual, you know, if you're going through a change, you know where to go for information. You're feeling supported for that. You know there's going to be a learning experience appropriate for the level of risk that's involved with the outcome of that. So that gives you a lot more confidence. And you would then be expecting there to be a reduction in change fatigue and the increase in the trust that people have in your organization to make change.
Yeah, I absolutely love that because they're feeling supported. And like you said, that trust, all that factor comes in. So it's really imperative from a company wide perspective, but that support that those individuals need as well. I know that there's so much we can talk about, but I think people need to buy the book if they really want to, make that changing with confidence across the organization and with the individuals. But if you could say one most important habit that you want readers to sort of take away from reading that book, what would it be?
It's a great question. I think when I think of someone who's just sat down and read the book, what I would like them to think about is they'd obviously have a good picture of what good knowledge, what good learning, and what good growth looks like. So they'll understand that better. And I'd like them to, next time a change lands on their desk, instead of, approaching it with, sort of panic and fear, you sit down and think of four things. It's like, what do I need to know about this change? What do I need to do to actually apply this change and be able to sustain it ongoing? And what am I being measured by? What are the statistics that are measuring me? And then fourth, because we don't want to push all this onto the individuals because that's going to overwhelm them more, who do I reach out to? Is it my people leader? Is there a change maker in the organization who supports me with answering those three questions? And if you are a people leader reading it, how do you support your people to do that? Who do you reach out to find out that information for your people and for yourself? And if you're someone who's making the change, considering those things for all the people that are going to be adopting this new change.
I absolutely love it. So, if your organization wants to create change, which we all need to do if we're not moving forward, we're not growing, but changing with confidence, grab the book. The link is below. Thank you so much, Adrian, for trusting us in bringing your message and your expertise out into the world to really support organizations and individuals within organizations to really create that change with confidence, with trust, and with support. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan.
So grab your book. The link is below.